Hey everybody, I'm Marcus Hazelwood, and welcome to Clear Haze Exchange. I'm an energy engineer with over 15 years of experience in sustainability and energy efficiency consulting. Many find these topics a little complex, so I created Clear Haze Exchange to help provide clear, actionable insight, clearing the haze, so to speak. We'll cover plenty of topics under the umbrella of energy efficiency and sustainability. Let's get into today's conversation. Welcome, listeners, to Clear Haze Exchange. This is season 2, where we're focusing on uncovering some of the hidden systems and decisions shaping long-term performance in the built environment. My next guest is Umesh Atre. His background expands from certifications, modeling, and advisory. Umesh is a sustainability leader with more than 2 decades of experience delivering high-performance buildings that balance environmental impact, human well-being, and long-term economic value. Currently sustainability lead for Park Hill and formerly director of sustainability at Studio 8 Architects. Umesh has led over 200 green building projects across LEED, WELL, and other frameworks, bringing deep expertise in building performance, modeling, lifecycle cost analysis, and decision support for owners and institutions. Umesh, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. Glad to be here.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing now and what kind of interesting projects you might think are worth sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm currently at a firm called Park Hill. We have been around for the last 80 years. So, we do everything under the sun when it comes to building design. So, all architecture, interior design, engineering as well. The only thing we actually don't do is single family housing. We are close to almost 700 total staff now. We have 14 locations, but what's unique about us is we are so big, but we are still very regional. So a majority of our offices are actually here in Texas, and then we have a couple of locations in Oklahoma and then one in New Mexico. So my role at Park Hill is I'm the sustainability lead, and so I wear a number of different hats. My main role is being a resource to all the different design teams. So, if a project is pursuing something like LEED or WELL, then of course I get involved on it. But regardless of that, what we have here is we have something called a project kickoff, right, on every project. And so I try to get involved on as many of those as I can, because that's when some of these sustainability discussions need to happen. And so that's like the right time for me to insert myself into those discussions. And so we talk about, all things energy, water, waste. If a project is going for certification, of course, we start reviewing the certification requirements as well. We do have an in-house building performance team. So we do in-house building energy modeling, daylighting analyses, embodied carbon analysis. So I kind of help on that side of things as well. The other part of my role is actually at a corporate level. We do firm-wide greenhouse gas accounting. So I'm responsible to make sure that we track that year after year. And then we have made a number of different industry commitments. There's the AI 2030 commitment. There's the SE 2050 commitment on the structural side. And then there's the AI materials pledge on the interior sides. I'm like the main point person. I make sure that we are, staying in line with all those commitments and the reporting as well. As far as projects go, we do a lot of school projects. So that's really what comes to mind. I work in a part of Texas, which is where sustainability is not big, right? It's the western part of Texas. And so it's a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to be honest. It's difficult to talk to clients sometimes because not everybody is receptive about sustainability. And we'll talk a little bit about that later today, but how do you change the conversation? How do you make it from something that is usually viewed as something which is added cost to something of value to them? right?
Yeah, I know we were talking prior to starting this, thinking about long term, given that there are areas in the United States where there aren't regulations pushing sustainability, or there are regulations, but there are people that are unfamiliar, so they don't understand truly the value. You've worked on hundreds of sustainability projects. And what do you think are some decisions, or maybe one decision that teams might underestimate that ends up shaping the outcomes for for a long period of time, more than 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, there's a number of decisions that come to mind which can actually have a huge impact throughout the life cycle of the project. One, of course, and not every project has control over this, but the location of the project is the utmost important factor when it comes to sustainability and across the life cycle of the project, because where you're located can have such a huge impact, uh, both on the operations but also like environmental effects that your project has. If you're close to basic amenities, if you're close to public transit, if you're close to biking and walking paths, for example, if your employees or your occupants can actually just walk to a restaurant, I mean, that is something that can actually help towards human or your occupant health and wellness as well. But overall, it just you're trying to you actually end up saving a lot of natural resources somewhere else, because now you're not building on sites which may not be previously developed, right? So they may be farmland or natural lands. And so you're making sure that you're being a good steward of the environment. And
And how much do
following
you think
that, this is, sorry, go
how
ahead.
much would you say that people are thinking about that piece when you're talking with owners? How much do you think they really take that into considerations, or do they move past it?
Well, many a times the project location is fixed, and
Mhm,
we are
yeah.
brought into the project after the fact. There's only a few instances where we have actually had the option where the client has actually sent us three different sites for feasibility analysis. And this is mostly from a climatic feasibility analysis where we run sunshade analyses and daylighting and solar studies and things like that. But that's where we also can educate the client further, saying, hey, this location is actually better than the other because of these other factors. But with that said, we just moved into our new office location here in Austin, and we were very intentional about where we wanted to be, because we are in this mixed use development in Austin called the Domain, and it's got everything within a 5-minute walk. So we've got like multiple restaurants, retail. There's apartments. Actually, a few of our employees live in these apartments, which I can actually see from my from my window here. So if it comes to you, if you're the decision maker, then for sure, I think if it is within your power, I think it's something to definitely think about.
That's good. That's good. And of course, like you said, if it's a fixed location, you can't do much about it. But this kind of leads to sustainable intent. How does it equal real value? So many projects start with strong sustainability and even wellness, thinking about the occupants. They start with good sustainability goals, but the gap between intent and the actual outcomes usually emerge. So how do you look at those goals and align what's actually possible to carry out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And before we get to that, I'll just mention one other thing, which is tied to your first question. Is location obviously is important, but not all projects will have that option. What comes next, and this is something which is within every project or every building team's control, is your basic building form and your orientation, because that is something that is going to get fixed for the life of your building, and that can actually affect a lot of your future design decisions. I mean, for example, if depending on your orientation, you're going to have access to daylighting and views and any potential problems that might come from that, right? Like glare and thermal issues and things like that. And so I just want to mention that is definitely something that any design team should be able to control is making sure that you're orienting your building correctly, and that you don't have a huge floor plate wherein you have maybe a big difference between how zones are going to be along the perimeter of your building versus the core. And so I just wanted to mention that before I get into your question about intent versus actual outcomes and where those gaps emerge, right? And so I think the biggest one I've seen, and honestly, this is across all industries, I believe, is if you have a lack of clear communication between different parties, between different stakeholders, then that can be your biggest gap, right? And so what happens is if you're designing a sustainable project, you'll have something called a visioning workshop or a charrette, right, where all stakeholders come together and you talk about sustainability. Everybody has great ideas. There's a lot of brainstorming, but many a times what happens is those things do not get written down. Those do not become part of anybody's responsibilities. Those do not become part of anybody's contractual requirements. And so what happens is when the project moves into the schematic design development phases, many a times these things get forgotten because, well, nobody's held responsible for them. And so I think it's important to establish a hierarchy, establish a responsibility matrix, saying, hey, you know what, if this project has a net zero goal, or if this is supposed to be the smartest building in the world, what does that really mean? Let's
Yeah.
break it down and let's start assigning responsibilities to different consultants.
How
So
does it
those clear thresholds, I think, are really important to be set early in the project.
how might you say that that fits into building where would it be built thinking about the RFP where the owner is developing their request for proposal and trying to understand what they want, and once you selected the design team and you're having this charrette, how would you bridge that gap between those 2?
That's again another excellent point, and we actually I have been helping some owners. So I'm acting as the owner's representative on a couple of projects, and so if you are actually getting involved early on, you can have an influence on how those RFPs are actually written or what language gets included in them. And so, and then without going into details, but yes, you can very clearly define all these roles in your RFP. And many times what happens is the the main person or the prime on your project is going to be your project architect. And so it is that communication, that correspondence becomes really important, is that person or that team then starts hiring all the consultants and sub consultants, and eventually starts interacting with the general contractors as well. And so it's important not just to state what's expected in the design, right? Because we want to make sure that everything that is getting designed is getting carried over into construction, but then also getting carried over into operations. Because we are talking about a building that is going to last 75 to 100 years on average, or even longer, depending on what kind of materials he use. Another gap I'll mention real quick is something which is very common on building designs is value engineering, right?
Yeah.
And so many times it's that first hurdle that you encounter is post cost.
Yeah.
And when owners hear about sustainability or green building design, they're like, well, if this is going to come with a premium, then we don't have the budget for it. And so nobody is thinking long term. Nobody is thinking about the long term benefits or the value that some of these sustainability strategies provide. And so that then can become a perceived gap between what the design intent is versus how much is it going to cost.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, and so you've worked deeply with life cycle cost analysis as well, because the money, the value is very, very important, and I agree with you. It's often missed because we're thinking about those upfront costs and less about what this long-term operational cost might be. So why is it still underused in decision making? Why do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we used to do a lot of life cycle cost analysis on projects where it was required, like a federal project, for example. However, we used to do a lot of life cycle cost analysis on school projects, and that was not a requirement on the projects. It's something that we brought to the table. We thought it was important to educate the clients, and the reason is because we think just laying all the options on the table is really important. The reason why it does not actually get used as much, I think the one thing is it just gets brought to the table at the wrong time. It gets brought to the table later in the design phase when maybe a lot of the design decisions have already been made, and then it's not an effective tool anymore. It's kind of like you're trying to justify your design decisions, or you're just using it as a reporting tool, and that shouldn't be how it is used. Now sometimes there is a misalignment, if you will, between who's paying for the project, who's paying the first cost versus who's benefiting from the project, right? And so we work with different types of clients. Now, if you have a project which is going to be owner occupied and operated, like a public project, for example, then they care deeply about the entire life cycle of the project, right? And so it is much easier to talk about life cycle cost analysis with those kind of projects. However, if you're looking at a project that is going to change hands after it's built, like it's typically you see that in the real estate industry, is developers will build projects, and then next year it's going to the ownership changes hands, in which case they may not really be interested in that anymore. I mean, budgets will always be an issue unless a client or a developer has a really clear vision of the future. Now, sometimes lifecycle cost analysis does show great benefits, but there is no immediate gratification, right? There is no immediate value that clients see. In which case, it might get just postponed because it might just get said, "Well, that's not our problem. That's something that the operations team is supposed to manage," right?
Yes, yes, yes. I could attest to that as well. Is I worked for a university to where it was required, but the capital project manager in some cases wasn't pushing the engineers or the design team to really get it completed. But we need to still, but like you said, sometimes it's not thought about because of thinking about the now cost. But I think it's very important to prioritize it. So thinking about that, it moves into the questions I have around understanding the hidden systems behind not only facility operations, but also occupant well-being. So you have well certification, which is focused on the occupants. The well certification is focused on the well-being of the occupants in the building for our listeners. But these frameworks focus on people. But the question I have, what is the invisible systems that affect occupants on a day to day? And what's the value of those certifications?
Yeah, that's a good question again. I mean, both well and fitwell have been designed with occupants in mind, as you mentioned, and over the years both of them have. Well, for one, actually has something called performance verification, which is required on all projects, similar to commissioning on lead projects, and that is supposed to help address the actual operational aspects of different systems. But however, I mean, if I understand you correctly, you're asking for, well, what are still some of those invisible elements out there that might be affecting occupants, right? And
Yes.
so first one that comes to mind is air and water quality. Uh, you know, testing definitely helps, but operationally, workplaces are dynamic systems, and seating layouts change. There might be like spaces might get refitted out, occupants might change. There might be a completely different environment that you're looking at by the time the project actually gets occupied. Occupants actually do not, projects get designed for certain ASHRAE ventilation standards or rates, but that is not what occupants are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. What they're actually experiencing is, well, if I'm close to the window, I'm going to experience glare, or I might actually experience cold weather. Cold weather because the slab at the end of that floor is getting colder than the core portions of the building, right? So they are experiencing that, and that's not what typically gets envisioned when you design. Uh, they also, I mean, air quality is something which honestly can have a huge impact on occupant health and well-being, and it's not something which is easy to track. I mean, nowadays you start seeing more control systems which can provide you with that information, but not all buildings have that. Other thing is, many times time is a design variable that gets missed, and I mean it's the reality, right? You can design the best and the most healthiest building, but over time things are going to fail, things are going to degrade, and so how do you keep up with that? There is that continuous operations and continuous maintenance, which is really required. And occupants are not, they don't really feel each and everything separately. Like they don't feel uh, air and water and acoustics and all these things separately. It's a combined effect. And so it's this cumulative effect that occupants are feeling. And so if you just keep looking at it as a line item on a scorecard, for example, that's not the right way to look at it, right? And
Yeah.
so uh, controls is another thing which comes to mind, and that could be HVAC controls, lighting controls, daylighting controls, because how you're actually managing these spaces matters. And so those are kind of some of the things which come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. There's a lot of value in satisfied occupants, and it makes me think about a study that I came across about the air quality in a building. Thinking about a high rise lease spaces, and if the air quality is not good, and you have people going home sick, for many companies their highest expense is the salaries of the employees, and then you have healthcare. So if the occupants aren't in an environment that they are healthy and they are thriving, that's comfortable, you have either less productivity or you're losing money from your employees either being out sick or not being, able to perform at their highest. How do you get your clients or owners to understand that value?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, occupants are going to notice, if everything is working fine, then honestly, nobody notices the systems. They will start noticing the systems when things start failing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when things break, but how quickly are they brought back online? How frequently do they fail? So if it's like a recurring theme in an office space, and that can put a lot of stress on occupants, right? And you definitely don't want that. And you're absolutely right. Absenteeism, productivity loss, these are huge issues for not just owners, I mean, not just like office workers, but actually schools and public institutions take a huge hit on that as well.
Yeah. That's good. What do you think are some early warning signs that project is prioritizing certification over lived experience? You mentioned there's adoption of some, but it's slower in some of the schools. But what would you say is an early warning sign that the project or the owner is not is prioritizing the certification plaque over that actual lived experience?
I think, I mean, you start seeing some of these warning signs during your project meetings, right? And this could come from the design teams themselves if they're not uh, well versed in sustainable design principles and long term benefits of sustainability. But this could very well come from the client as well. And so, sometimes you might hear things like, we need 10 more points to get to lead platinum or well platinum. What's the easiest way we can get them? And so there isn't any holistic thinking about, well, if we do go after certain points, is there something else that is getting affected? Because honestly, all these things are related. Everything is connected. And so if you make a change in one part of your design, there's a good chance that something else somewhere else is going to get affected by that as well. Right. And so sometimes you might hear things like, well, we'll just take care of that later. We'll document that later. Or it's not our problem. The contractor can take care of it. In which case, it's like, you're basically shifting, moving your responsibility to someone else. And that's not the right way to do things because, we start every project with something called integrated design or an integrated design approach. And you'll see that in LEED, you'll see that across a lot of different green building certifications, is getting all the stakeholders together, having like brainstorming sessions, set your goals, make sure those goals are written down, make sure people are held responsible to those goals throughout the life of the project. But that is something where I think it is lacking in the industry right now. We honestly can't do it on each and every one of our projects either. But that is like the ideal situation where these things, if someone says, well, let's just get another point because that will put us to platinum. And maybe that helps them on the marketing side of things. And that could be an important factor for a certain client, but that's not the right way to do it, right? And so on the other side of things, someone might say, well, that's not required for certification, so why should we do it?
Yeah.
Right? And so that again diminishes the value of something which might be really important and may provide great value to the project, but just because it is not required for a certain certification or is not on a checklist, it just gets removed. So instead, what design team should be asking is, let's think about how a certain occupant is going to feel at a certain time of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, that's good. It makes me think about, another plug to energy modeling. That approach is with energy modeling in a design, you're able to, model on an hourly basis rather than looking at it for and making assumptions like, "Well, this meets peak load in the peak day of the season, so it should be good. They should have enough comfort." So, again, there's a lot of pieces and parts that might be a little bit technical that we wouldn't expect, some people in a different technical profession to understand as much as a person in it. But I think there's a lot of value to understanding why these certifications exist, and it gives the framework for an organization or to achieve a lot of these value points that you made for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I can just mention here, this is not really directly tied to wellness, but when I spent 3.5 years in Canada working with some really big real estate developers. And then after I moved to Texas, I worked on a couple of projects here as well. And these are not necessarily wellness checklists, but we used to actually help real estate developers get to certain certification levels, because many times the real estate financing is actually tied to lower interest rates, and it's tied to higher loan proceeds and preferential financing terms. Uh, and so these certifications actually can reduce lender risk through lower operational costs, higher property valuations, things like that. We actually used to use something called the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which you may have heard of or you may have used on your projects as well. But that actually, is not even looking at modeling. To your point, energy modeling is a great tool. I'm a big fan of it. I've done a lot of it in my first job. Energy Star is actually looking at real data. So it's actually looking at, they do something called CBEX, like commercial building surveys, and they look at they collect actual data, and then you are comparing your project to something which exists in real time. And what I used to see happen is a lot of these real estate developers actually used to compete amongst themselves, because you get an Energy Star score if you are a high performing asset, or if your entire portfolio is high performing. And to me, that actually helps, right? So checklists and certifications can actually have a positive effect, can create this healthy competition amongst owners and developers, which could be a great thing as well.
But these are conversations that need to be had for people to understand, and that's why I like those points that you're making. From an owner's perspective, where short-term cost pressures, how do they often undermine the long-term value? If there's any examples you can think of, I know there's plenty of them out there, but anything come to mind?
I mean, many a times things get removed, like based on a line item. Like, so for example, a building envelope might get. So if you're designing to something which is above energy code, an owner might decide to just build it to the minimum, and then there might be a decision made somewhere else. And so I think we talked about it earlier as like looking at this on measure by measure basis. It might sound reasonable when you're doing value engineering. It might work in the short term, but collectively, cumulatively, it can have a really huge effect on your overall building energy consumption. And so I think again it goes back to how do you convince clients, or how do you kind of try to promote uh, holistic design thinking. Systems thinking is another word that comes to mind. uh, and again, I mean, cost and budget pressures are most often felt by, unfortunately, are felt by public institutions, right? And so that is actually where these things become even more important. So if you're trading your building envelope quality for first cost, that is going to compound into something much larger down the road. Sometimes systems are dumbed down. They're like, let's just use something that we used on previous projects. Let's just make it really, really simple. Well, that is then maybe not building in as much of robustness into your building design. We talked about life cycle cost. Sometimes that is viewed as a first cost, or as a hurdle. And so if you're not using it as a design tool, or something that is helping you inform your design decisions, then I think that's where owners can actually or might need to be educated. And then, I mean, many a times owners might remove things like commissioning, performance valuations, energy audits, things like that, which add incredible value to the operational side of things.
That's good. So what role should commissioning play in performance verification in protecting design intent? We're talking a lot about short and long-term value and how early decisions that are made in design and charrettes pushing ideas. But what role do you think commissioning and performance verification should play in protecting that design intent?
Uh, I mean, I know you do commissioning as well, correct? Yeah, I think commissioning, performance verification, I mean, these are like the main leverage points or leverage tools that clients have. Because if I'm an owner, then commissioning, performance verification actually is going to help me make sure that whatever was the design intent is actually getting put into practice, right? And so it is also reducing your operational risk. It is actually helping you transfer your knowledge as well from design to operations. And so that's a role that a commissioning agent has to play, is to make sure that you're not just testing the systems, but you're also helping the operations team understand how these things are supposed to work in the future. And also, like, come up, you have to create something called a systems manual, which helps them understand if something were to go wrong, then how should they be looking to fix that. So it's this whole change management infrastructure, right? So that is how I think that is how these things need to be framed. But I mean, speaking of commissioning, there's, again, as you probably know, there's different types of commissioning too, right? So if you have new buildings, you have new build commissioning. If you have existing buildings, you can do retro commissioning. This is for projects that may never have been commissioned before. If you're returning to a building, then that's called recommissioning, where maybe there's a systemic change or something like that, and then it becomes important to come back and recommission the systems. And then there's something called continuous or monitoring based commissioning, wherein this is like real time performance monitoring on projects. And so all of these processes, they help maximize efficiency, obviously provide energy savings, and operational reliability for clients.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of parts and pieces in this space of designing, building, and then maintaining. In terms of this topic of leadership and alignment and also accountability, because not everything that is pushed as sustainable is right. There are things that still need some work to develop, whether it's a technology or just a practice. But you've worked across architects, engineers, owners, operators. Where does alignment most often break down between those different professionals and stakeholders?
I mean, I'll again go back to just mentioning that having an integrated design uh, process is really important, because that's where you start asking some of these questions like, what is the big idea on the project? What is the main concept? You need something that kind of binds everything together, because unless you have that binding agent, things start falling apart, right? And then we talked about clear communication. I think that's where alignment most often breaks down. Is the architects design the building, gets handed over to the contractors. The contractors design the building. They're not held responsible for anything contractually, and then it gets handed over to the operators. And so there is no clear knowledge that is getting transferred across these different teams. And that is, I think, that the biggest failure point, or the biggest misalignment that I see. Many a times owners assume certain things too. Owners might uh, assume that the design team will figure it out. The design team will assume that the owners may have already thought of something, and we are just supposed to follow what they're saying. And so unless you talk to each other, and like I said, this is not just in the sustainability industry, this is something which honestly applies to all industries, right? And so contractors not talking to operators or the operational team is a big failure point as well. And so I think, in short, I mean, I think it's fair to say that alignment fails when sustainability is not viewed as something that everybody should be valuing, uh, and it's like considered to be nobody's responsibility, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, you're right. It's not just in sustainability. It's that this is just a business model that should be followed anywhere because it's effective. I wanted to ask, what mindset shift would you say would most improve collaboration across design teams? Is there specific ways to connect the stakeholders, the design team, the construction team, and operations? Because this is a life cycle of big dollars put into the initial design and construction.
I think that the one mindset shift, I think, would be to think about a project as not something that needs to be delivered and closed out at a certain time. It needs to be thought about as like a system that should keep on working, should keep on performing, even when all the designers and contractors and everybody has left the room.
Yeah.
And so you need to start thinking about this holistically across. Well, are we designing something which is going to last for the next 75 to 100 years, when obviously the design team is going to leave after a couple of years after the project is done, and so are the contractors are going to leave as well. So goes back to a little bit about transferring the knowledge. Like, are we making sure that we are designing something which will keep working as designed?
That's good. So, lastly, what would you say, looking 10 years ahead, what do you hope people say about today's buildings are designed for the next generation or generations?
Uh, Interesting question. uh,
Because I guess I think about in this question, and it is a little bit complicated because in the past, when we weren't involved in design, but thinking more now about energy efficiency, emissions. So looking at how things are today and then thinking about 10 years ahead, how we're progressing, what would you hope people would say about how today's buildings were designed that we can point out? Kind of a positive.
uh, well, I mean, in general, I would like them to say that uh, the buildings were designed for them. It was designed for the people, or with the people in mind. Uh, I would also like them to say that these were not just designed to be Instagram worthy, like something that looks great but actually doesn't perform
Take a
uh,
picture of your meal and all
perform
that.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, you see this all the time, right? It's Products look beautiful from the outside, but when you actually start talking to operations and to the occupants, there's some real issues that they face on day-to-day basis. There's another certification, we didn't talk about it today, but it's by the International Living Future Institute. They promote something called living buildings. They use an analogy of a flower, right? The flower actually takes whatever energy it needs from the sun. It takes its water from the ground. It creates its own food, and then it finally goes back into the ground. And it's like it's a loop, right? It's a closed loop system. And I hope we design more buildings like that, which are not taking anything away from our environments, but actually giving something back in return, right?
Good. That's good. Well, Umesh, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your great wealth of wisdom on the built environment. You certainly cleared the haze around a lot of things, areas in terms of hidden systems, and also building occupants. Brought a lot of light and understanding to that hopefully is valuable to our audience. Anything final words you have that you would like to share?
I mean, it's actually a project that just came to mind. If I can just mention that real quick, I live in Austin, and we used to have an old airport here in Austin called Miller Airport. And back in the early 2000s, all the aviation operations used to exist, and a master developer came in, and they actually created a master development agreement with the city of Austin, right? And what they did is they actually inserted some sustainability guidelines into that master development agreement, which defined certain sustainability criteria for all projects that were going to be built for the next, I believe, for the next 30 years or so. And so some of the guiding principles were like designing with nature, designing for health, reduced waste. And these have been around for the last 25 or so years. And so point I'm trying to make is it comes back to a long-term vision. And I mean, hundreds of projects have been built on that site. It's a 700 plus acre site. And it's like residential, commercial, multifamily, hotels, everything has come up. And each of these is a sustainable building. It has to meet certain sustainability requirements. So it's that domino effect, right? And so I think it's important for each and every one of us as designers or as clients to make those very responsible decisions now, because those could affect future generations, as you mentioned, right, for the next 100 or more years.
That's good. That's good. Yes, I completely agree with that. We want to think how we're utilizing valuable resources. That's certainly the intent. Umesh, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot, Marcus. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Clear Haze Exchange. New episodes drop every 2 weeks. You can catch Clear Haze Exchange on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, and more. Let's clear the haze about sustainability and energy efficiency together. Subscribe now and join the conversation.